This is The Lord and the Rings, Session 2. If this is your first time joining us, thank you. I'm really glad that you're here and that you're trusting me with your time. If you are coming back after Session 1, thank you as well. I'm really glad you're back and that I haven't managed to scare you off yet. And speaking of coming back in the first session, I kind of want to start by giving a brief summary of what we talked about last time, because I kind of want to build on some of the ideas that we established. Last week, we talked about the idea of domination, and that's a very dramatic word. Whenever we hear it, sometimes we think about wars and battles and one group coming in and conquering another group. And those things are domination, yes. But domination doesn't start with going in and conquering another group. That's the action. And actions are preceded by the attitudes of our mind and the beliefs of our heart. You see, domination begins whenever someone starts saying, my will, my plans, my desires are more important than the needs of those around me, and more important than the will of God. Most of us don't have a desire to conquer the world. But on some level, each of us wants to have some control over our lives, to feel like we have power over our own little spheres of influence. But that's wrong. Christians, those who follow God, are not supposed to have power for themselves. It's not supposed to be about their plans, their desires, their wants. It's supposed to be about God and His plan, and about taking care of the needs of others, about loving others. So we might not all want to conquer the world, but we can sometimes develop a domination mindset where we focus on our own little spheres and how we want to control them and how we want things to go according to our will and our plan instead of the will of God. That's what we talked about last time. And whenever we talked about that, I brought the idea of magic in Middle-earth up at the beginning of the discussion. And I brought up this quote from one of Tolkien's letters. And in the quote, Tolkien divides magic into two categories. There is the good magic, the elvish magic, and there is the magic of Sauron and the villains of the Lord of the Rings. And what separates the two is their usage. The elves tend to use magic to enhance their natural abilities and for creation and artistic expression. Whereas Sauron and the villains use dark, evil magic that is used to dominate, to gain power. That's the difference. After the previous session, I was talking about the idea of magic in Middle-earth with my associate pastor. And I realized that diving a little bit more into this idea of these two categories of magic could be a useful way to introduce the topic that I want to cover today. And so one of the ideas that kind of came up in our discussions was, okay, there are these two categories of magic, but how separate are they? Is there any relationship between them? Is there any overlap between them? And that's an interesting idea that I want to explore a little bit more. And I want to start out by using a contrasting example from my childhood. So a little fact about me, I've played video games pretty much my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are me playing Super Mario Bros. On the NES at my grandmother's house. And I've continued playing video games pretty much until the present day. Now I'm an adult and I have a lot less time to spend playing video games because I have to do stupid adulting things, but I still enjoy video games. And one of the genres of games that I've always really enjoyed is the turn-based role-playing game. And if you're unfamiliar with that genre, that's okay. All you really need to know is that these games, many of them, at least the ones that I tended to play, were placed in fantasy settings, fantasy universes. And instead of controlling a single character, you would be given a group of characters that you could command. And each of these characters at your disposal had a different set of skills. So you'd have like one guy who was really good at close quarters combat, and you'd give him a sword and just like send him into the middle of your enemy group to fight with his sword. And then you'd have another guy who was good at range combat, and so you'd give him a bow and arrow and have him shoot enemies from further away. And often what these games would do was that they would give you multiple magic users. These two guys, these lovely characters before you, are from Final Fantasy. And something that these games would do, not always, but often, is they'd split magic into at least two categories. You'd have the guy on the left who used magic that was useful for attacking your enemies. You know, throwing fireballs, calling down lightning, causing earthquakes, things like that. Then you'd have the guy on the right. His magic wasn't very useful for attacking. It was made to heal. And so if somebody in your group got hurt, you would use him to use his magic to heal them. And that was his purpose. And generally, not always, but often, the people on the left, the people who were good at using attack magic, could only use magic to attack. They could only use that type of magic. And the people on the right, the healers, could only use healing magic. And there wasn't really like crossover because they were using two completely different types of magic. They were pulling from two sources of energy. They were pulling from completely different pools of magic and sorcery, or however you want to picture it. That is not really how Tolkien talks about his two categories, about his magic. In Middle-earth, magic is a tool, and tools are not in themselves good or evil. In fact, Tolkien writes, "The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized." He's saying that machines are our real-world, modern-day equivalent to magic. And machines are morally neutral. A car is not good or evil. It depends on how it is used. I can use my car to deliver food to the homeless, or I can use it to drive into a crowd of people. I can use this computer that's sitting in front of me to create a small group, to create this presentation that I hope will have some value. Or I can use it to do illicit things online. It's all about the use. In the same way, a magical flame could be used to provide light, to provide heat to somebody who's freezing to death. Or it could be used to burn down a building. It's all about use. You see, the elves' magic isn't good because it's the magic that the elves use, or because the elves can only use good magic. And the magic that Sauron uses isn't bad because Sauron's the one using it, or because Sauron can only use magic that's bad. It's all about how they choose to use it. The elves tend to use magic responsibly and for good reasons, and Sauron tends to use magic for evil, for bad reasons. But that raises the question, can somebody who starts out using magic one way switch over and start using it another way? The answer is yes, and in fact in session 1 we talked about the forging of the rings of power. And we talked about how the elves started to move from using their magic responsibly for art and creation and started moving it towards domination. They started to pervert their magic and started to use it for evil purposes. That didn't end up going very well for them. Many of them died, they had to fight multiple wars, and so they kind of learned their lesson. Whenever the elves started using magic, they were taught by spirits who obeyed God. And those spirits taught them how to use magic responsibly, how to use it for good things. And so the elves start off using their magic for good. And for a while they do that. But then, like we talked about last week, whenever they are afraid of losing their power, their prestige, the world is changing quickly and they're not sure of what their place is in it, but they don't want to go back into the West and go back into the lands where they're going to have to obey God's laws. They start perverting their art and turning it towards domination with the Rings of Power. And like I said, the forging of the Rings of Power does not end well for the elves. A lot of them die. They have to fight multiple wars to try to amend the situation. It doesn't go well. So they see that and they're like, oh, we made a mistake by using our magic for domination. Let's start going back and using it responsibly again. You see, there's a common misconception with the elves. Whenever we meet them in The Lord of the Rings, the elves seem like these ethereal, wise, near-perfect beings. Like they're almost angelic to us. And the misconception is that they were always that way. Whenever I can tell you, that is not the case. The elves get to be these wise, ethereal beings in The Lord of the Rings because they have learned at the School of Hard Knocks. They have learned exactly what not to do. Throughout their history, the elves have made mistake after mistake. And those who survived, they now know exactly how not to be wise, how to be foolish. They know exactly what not to do. In fact, some of the oldest among them, they witnessed the mistakes that were made. They learned firsthand what not to do. Because the elves don't die of old age, they tend to learn a lot faster. Whenever humans make a mistake, they might learn from it, but then a few generations later, their descendants make the same mistake. But elves, being immortal, get the chance to learn a lot faster. So you have elves who witnessed all these mistakes and who learned exactly what not to do. And then you have some of the younger elves who may not have witnessed these things firsthand, but they know somebody who witnessed these things firsthand. So the elves get to be these wise, immortal beings because they've made every mistake along the way and they've managed to learn from it. Tolkien writes, the elves fall, and right now he's talking about their moral fall, although more literal falls do occur after the moral fall. But Tolkien writes, the elves' fall is into possessiveness and, to a less degree, into perversion of their art to power. Last session we talked about the perversion of their art to power. But today I want to focus on the first part of this sentence. I want to focus on the possessiveness. Tolkien writes, the fall of the elves comes about through the possessive attitude of Feanor and his 7 sons to the Silmarils. So who is Feanor and what are the Silmarils? So just a heads up, we're going to start by going way back into the far past of Middle-earth, long before the Lord of the Rings. We're going to start with the obscure details. And throughout this session, we're going to move forward in time. And eventually, by the end, we're going to be like firmly in Lord of the Rings, like stuff you will recognize if you've watched the movies. But first, we're going to start in the far off past. So during the first session, I talked about how whenever the world was first created by God, there was a spirit who rebelled against God. That spirit came to be called Morgoth. And Morgoth and his forces kind of took power in the eastern part of the world. But there were other spirits who still obeyed God. And they came down into the western part of the world. And they, with the elves, created a blissful existence, a paradise on earth in the west. Feanor was an elf who was born into this paradise. Feanor's father was one of the leaders of the elves in the West. And Feanor was a craftsman. He loved creating things, and he goes around and he studies how to make different things, and he starts incorporating magic into his creative works. And one day he goes into his workshop, and he creates the Silmarils, 3 holy gemstones, 3 gems that have holy light inside of them. And these things are amazing. They're the most beautiful, the most grand, the most astonishing things that any elf will ever make in the history of the world. And the other elves are like fawning over these things, like, oh, they're so great. And Feanor is getting proud, and he's falling in love with his own accomplishment. And it's great. But Morgoth's still out there. And Morgoth doesn't like that there are people who are living free and happy outside of his control. And so Morgoth starts causing some mischief. And then graduates from mischief to something more extreme. He launches a surprise attack on the West. Now this attack, as far as like number of casualties go, is not like the worst thing ever. But it's intended to destroy the morale of those in the West. And during this attack, Morgoth kills the 2 sacred trees that the spirits had grown in the West. If you've watched the Rings of Power show on Amazon, this is in the first episode in the prologue. It talks a little bit about Morgoth killing the trees. But Morgoth also kills Feanor's father. And he does something else. He steals the Silmarils. So Feanor learns about this. He finds out his father has been killed, that his prized possession has been stolen, and he is angry. He is filled with hate. He's angry with Morgoth for killing his father. He's angry with Morgoth for stealing the Silmarils, the greatest thing he's ever made. He's angry with the spirits that he lives with because they couldn't protect him and his family from suffering this loss. And so Feanor makes a decision. He's now inherited a position of leadership from his father. And so he gets in front of his people and he gives a speech. And in the speech, Feanor says, hey, these spirits that we live with say that they brought us here to protect us. But they didn't protect us. They're not real. That's not their real goal. Their real goal is to control us. They want to hold us back. If we were free from them, we could accomplish great things. And so I'm going to leave this place. I'm going to go back into the East. And I'm going to accomplish great things. I'm going to take the Silmarils back from Morgoth. I'm going to form kingdoms and realms that have beauty beyond what you can imagine. And they are going to be under my control. I'm going to get to decide what happens. I'm going to do great works. And you can have the same. Follow me. We can go back into the East. We can make treasures and art greater than anything we've accomplished here. We can take back the Silmarils. We can form our own kingdom where we're the ones in charge. Follow me. And unlike me, Feanor is a very gifted orator, a very gifted speaker. Trying to recreate his speech is hard because I'm not a great speaker like he is. But he manages to convince many people, not all of his people, but many of them, to follow him into the East. Back into the lands where Morgoth is currently in control. And before he leaves, Feanor and his sons swear an oath. An oath to pursue and kill anyone who tries to keep a Silmaril from them. Now this whole plan of Feanor's was a bad idea. And in fact, not everything, but almost everything bad that happens to the elves throughout their long history can kind of be traced back to this moment. The elves who follow Feanor suffer a lot of pain because of their decision. I can't go through all the things that resulted from Feanor's decision, from his inability to let go. Because that's really what it was. He couldn't let go of his most prized possessions, the Silmarils. He had to swear an oath to get them back. He couldn't let go of his anger. He couldn't let go of his desire for more possessions and more power for himself. So these are some of the results. Feanor led his people, the Noldor, into a war they could not hope to win. There are several different people groups of elves, and the Noldor are the ones that Feanor was a part of. But he led them into a war with Morgoth that they could not honestly hope to win. It led to the kinslaying at Alqualande. There's a very good chance I pronounced that incorrectly. I am not good at pronouncing Tolkien's words. But it led to the kinslaying at Alqualande, a battle in which elves murdered each other, which only led to betrayals and distrust among the elves, which just led to more infighting and more slaughter. It led to the death and imprisonment of many of his people. And it led to the death of Feanor and most of his family. These all resulted because Feanor could not let go. But whenever the elves go back and they start their wars with Morgoth, things don't go disastrously wrong immediately. Things go okay for the elves at first. But there's one leader among the elves, his name is Turgon, who knows that this can't last, and he's uneasy, and he wants to try to figure out a way to protect his people whenever things eventually start going wrong. And there's one spirit who still wants to help these elves. And that spirit's name is Ulmo. And Ulmo comes to Turgon. He says, hey, things are going okay now, but they're not always going to go okay. You need to prepare for whenever things start going badly. I'm going to help you. You see, there's this ring of mountains that's incredibly treacherous, incredibly dangerous to cross. But in the center of them, there's this lush valley. I'm going to show you a way through the mountains, a way to get to that lush valley. I want you to take your people there. I want you to set up a life for yourself there. And it's going to take a while for the enemy to find you. You're going to be safe, but only for a time. Because eventually, things are going to go bad. And the enemy is going to start closing in on you. When that happens, whenever word reaches my ears that the enemy is close to locating you, I'm going to send a messenger to you. And when that messenger comes, you need to take your people and you need to leave that valley. You need to leave the place I'm going to show you. And so Turgon agrees, and Ulmo shows him this valley. And Turgon takes his people there, and he establishes the kingdom of Gondolin. And for a while, things are good for Gondolin. They are spared some of the suffering that the outside world has at the hands of Morgoth. They are kept safe. They build a great and mighty and beautiful city. But before Ulmo left Turgon, he left him with a warning. But love not too well the work of thy hands and the devices of thy heart. Ulmo warned Turgon, hey, don't get too attached to the city that you're going to build. Don't get too attached to it, because it's only temporary. I want you to go there and build a nice life for your people. Build shelter, build a great place. But eventually, you're going to have to abandon it. You're going to have to leave it. It's only temporary. Don't fall too in love with the things that you build. and the things that you design. And so time passes. Morgoth starts winning the war. The elves start to fall, and Gondolin gets surrounded, and they are being closed in on from all sides. Ulmo finds out that Morgoth is close to figuring out where Gondolin is. So he sends his messenger. The messenger arrives, and Turgon doesn't listen. He doesn't abandon his city. He doesn't leave. He doesn't take his people away from this place. And there are two reasons for this. One reason I'm going to push off to another session because it fits better there. So I will be coming back to this story later. But another reason is Turgon had fallen too in love with what he had created, what he had designed, this city, this kingdom that he had made. He didn't want to abandon it. He'd made a good life for his people. And his walls and his city looked beautiful, and they looked too powerful and too strong to be conquered. And so he couldn't bring himself to leave it. But they weren't strong enough. Gondolin was attacked, and it was destroyed. And Turgon died. Love not too well the work of thy hands. So, I want to talk about one more thing from Middle-earth's far back history. I want to talk about Numenor. Tolkien writes, "Mankind's creative desires has various opportunities of fall. It may become possessive, cling to the things made as its own. The sub-creator wishes to be the Lord and God of his private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the creator. This will lead to a desire for power." Tolkien valued creativity. He was writing and drawing and painting pretty much his entire life. But he saw a problem with it. A problem that results from mankind's fallen nature. Whenever we create, we can become possessive. We can want to control what we have. We can want to have complete dominion over the things that we make or the things that we own. And whenever we do that, we want to be Lord and God. Lord and God, not of the entire world necessarily, but at least over our own little private creation. At least over the things that we've made. At least over the things that we have. But that starts to create that domination mindset I talked about earlier. We start to rebel against God. We start to think about what we want instead of what He wants. And whenever we start focusing on ourselves and our possessions and our desires, on some level we want power. Power to carry out our plans. Power to do what we want. And that can be a dangerous thing. So, I said I wanted to talk about the Numenorians. Who are they? Well, many humans decided to join with Morgoth. Some of them worshipped Morgoth. But there were some who resisted him. And these people were rewarded for their resistance to Morgoth. They were granted long life and a land where they could live in peace with plenty. And they established the kingdom of Numenor. And for a while, things were good. They were living long lives. They were happy and prosperous. But it didn't last. Things changed. If you read The Lord of the Rings, Numenor gets brought up quite a few times. It gets brought up in the movies once or twice, but I honestly cannot remember if it gets brought up in both the theatrical version and the extended edition, or if it only gets brought up in the extended edition of the movies. It's been a while since I've watched the theatrical version. But at least one version of the movies it gets brought up. And whenever people talk about Numenor in The Lord of the Rings, they talk about it longingly, wistfully, like, oh, we want to create something like Numenor. We miss Numenor. The Numenor that they are talking about is, whenever they talk about it wistfully or longingly, is Numenor as it started out, as it began. Because whenever it began, it honored God. Its people were wise and content. The Numenorians helped other people. They were altruistic to other people groups. They were kind. But that didn't last. Their long life aids their, the Numenorians, achievements in art and wisdom, but breeds a possessive attitude to these things, and desire awakens for more time for their enjoyment. The longer Numenor exists, the greater works its people start to do. They start making artistic achievement. They start advancing technologically. And they live longer than normal humans, than you or I would live. But they're not satisfied with what they have. They're not grateful for their longer life. They end up just wanting an even longer life. If you give a mouse a cookie, I don't know, what is it? He wants a glass of milk. Well, if you give a Numenorian 50 years longer to live, he'll want 100 years longer to live. And it's because they became possessive. They have a possessive attitude towards their time, towards the things that they create. It breeds possessiveness in them. And so they want more time to enjoy their possessions, more time to enjoy the things that they've made. And it leads them down a dark road. Those that live turn the more eagerly to pleasure and revelry, desiring ever more goods and more riches. And after the days of Tar and Kalaman, the offering of the first fruits to God was neglected. The Numenorians used to give their first fruits to God, to honor him. But as they focus more on their possessions and they want more goods and more riches, they start to ignore God. Because they don't care about his will any longer. They just care about their desires. Their desire for more stuff, for more goods, for more riches. And then they start doing terrible things in pursuit of these riches. Nonetheless, for long it seemed to the Numenorians that they prospered, and if they were not increased in happiness, yet they grew more strong, and the rich men ever richer. For they multiplied their possessions, and they built ever greater ships, and they sailed now with power and armory to Middle-earth, and they came no longer as bringers of gifts, but as fierce men of war, and they hunted the men of Middle-earth, and took their goods, and enslaved them. Numenor used to be an altruistic society. They used to help other people. They used to bring them gifts. They used to show them techniques for farming and growing crops to help them survive. And they expected little or nothing in return. But that didn't last, because as they came to value possessions more and wanted more and more riches, they needed to find some place to get those riches from. And so they started conquering and enslaving other people because they wanted more possessions. But one of my favorite parts about this passage is they were not increased in happiness. Their possessions didn't make them happy. It didn't satisfy them. It wasn't enough, so they had to keep conquering to get more stuff, but the stuff didn't make them happy, so they had to get more, but it was a vicious cycle. But they were never satisfied. They were never happy. Possessiveness doesn't lead to happiness, not in the long run. So if we don't want to be like the Numenorians, if we don't want to fall into possessiveness, what attitude should we have? So I am going to now skip ahead to The Lord of the Rings and the parts that everybody who's seen the movies will recognize. So sorry if I bored you up until this point. You can blame the people who encourage me to throw in some more obscure details to these lessons. But what attitude should we have about possessions? In The Two Towers, Merry and Pippin, the hobbits, have been captured by orcs. And during their captivity, Pippin finds out that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are following the orcs. They are coming to rescue Merry and Pippin. And so Pippin takes off the brooch, the pin that's holding his cloak together, and he drops it. He's sending a message to Aragorn, like, yes, we're still here and we're still alive. You're on the right track. And Aragorn finds it. And then later, Pippin, Merry, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, they're all reunited. And they start exchanging stories, like filling each other in on what they missed out on, like comparing notes. And Aragorn brings out the brooch that he found, and he's returning it to Pippin. And this brooch was a really special thing. It was given to the Fellowship by Galadriel and the Elves of Lothlorien. And this is not something that these elves typically do. This was a special, rare occasion. And so the fact that they gave them these gifts was really a high honor. And so whenever Aragorn goes to give Pippin back his brooch, Pippin starts talking like, oh, it was such a bad thing that I had to throw this treasure away. Like, this was such a big honor for me to receive this gift. It's such a shame that I had to just throw it away like garbage. But Aragorn reassures him. He says, no, you did the right thing. One who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters. And since we don't really use the word fetters anymore, fetters is like a chain or a manacle that goes around the leg. So Aragorn's saying if you can't get rid of something whenever you need to get rid of it, you're trapped. You're in chains. That's how possessiveness works. Whenever we need happiness to come from our possessions, from the things that we have, we're not going to be happy. We're going to be trapped by those things. Now, I'm going to be honest. Possessiveness is something that, I feel like I struggle with. I've had conversations, internal and external to myself, about my own possessiveness. My grandfather was a big collector, and I kind of inherited that from him. Now, the things we collect are very different. He collected, coins and stamps and motor vehicle related paraphernalia. I collect things from movies and video games and TV shows and books that I like. And so we collect very different things. But I do focus on stuff I have. But here's the thing. That stuff isn't going to bring me happiness. Not in the long run. I own a couple of swords from the Lord of the Rings. And they give me, whenever I first got them, they gave me, a spark of happiness. Ooh, this is really cool. I really like this. But there's always something else. I got my first sword. And then my wife gave me a second sword for my birthday. And then that second sword was the cool new part of my collection. And then another movie came. And then a Star Wars movie came out. And I got a Stormtrooper helmet and other silly stuff like that. There's always going to be another movie coming out. There's always going to be another thing to collect. And I'll enjoy it for a little while. And then there will be a new piece of my collection that I'll enjoy and will be the hot new thing. But there's always going to be something else. Because possessions can't fill the hole. They can't bring me ultimate happiness. Or I should say, they can't bring me joy. They can't bring me peace. Serving myself and my own interests won't bring me lasting joy. That only comes from serving God. So what does the Bible say? I'm about to blow your mind by bringing in some deep theology. By reading from the Ten Commandments. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. We start to covet whenever we become possessive, whenever we start focusing on things to make us happy. But that's not the way to happiness. In the New Testament, a rich young man comes up to Jesus and asks Jesus, "What do I need to do to be saved?" And Jesus lists off the typical answers, the Ten Commandment answers, and the guy's like, "I'm good. I followed the Ten Commandments. I followed God's commands. What else do I need to do to enter the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he had great wealth. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven." This young man came to Jesus thinking he was following God's will. He'd followed the Ten Commandments. He followed the law. He thought he had given over control to God, that he was following God's will. But there was an area of his life that he hadn't given over. He went away sad because he didn't want to give up his possessions. He went away sad because he didn't want to give up control to God. He was okay with God having control over most of his life, but when it came to his stuff, his possessions, he wanted to be in control. He wanted his own will to dominate in that area. And that's why he went away sad. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Whenever we're focused on money, or more likely the things that money can buy, we're focusing on ourselves. We're focusing on our own control. We're focusing on how we can have power within our own lives. And that leads to the domination mindset. We might not be trying to conquer the world, but we're trying to control our own finances, our own possessions. And that's not cool. That's not good. That's not what God wants. We're not supposed to serve money. We're not supposed to serve our own possessiveness. We're supposed to serve God. And here's the scary thing. Sometimes the things we want aren't in and of themselves bad things. Sometimes they're good things. Sometimes we go, "Oh, I'll be happy once I buy that house. Oh, now my car is about to die, so I need to either pay to get a new car or to repair the car that I already have. Then I'll be happy. Oh, my stepfather pointed out that the original builders of the house didn't put gutters all the way around it, so I need to have somebody come out and install some more gutters. Oh, I need to put in a storm shelter to protect my family from these Oklahoma weather." Can you tell that I'm kind of drawing on some personal experience here? But here's the thing. None of those things are in and of themselves bad. Like a home for the families, shelters so that we can live safely, a car so that I can go to work and help provide for my family, a storm shelter to protect us from tornadoes and rough weather because, we live in a part of the country where we have those things. All of these things are good things. Like, I'm called to protect and help provide for my family. Those aren't bad things. But they become bad whenever my happiness is dependent on them. There's always going to be another repair project. There's always going to be something else. Those things are good things. A home, shelter, means to provide. But if I focus so much on them that I start missing God, if my happiness is dependent on them and not on the will of the Lord, if I start putting them above God or ignoring God or thinking about these things more than God, then they become a distraction. And most of the time we don't say out loud, oh, I'm going to focus on getting like a new car more than I focus on God. We usually don't say those things out loud. But how much time do we spend focusing on the car over God? How much time do we spend trying to do things that'll help get the car? And how little energy do we give to God in comparison? That's one of the scariest things about us humans and our fallen, sinful nature, is that we can start off with good intentions, but we're tainted with sin. So these good intentions can be twisted to evil. They can become distractions. And this is reflected in the world of the Lord of the Rings. So when Morgoth was defeated, things seemed good for a while. But Morgoth, though he was the first spirit to rebel against God, he was not the only spirit to rebel against God. Whenever he rebelled, he convinced other spirits to join him in rebellion. And one of the other spirits, his second in command, the guy who was just a step lower than Morgoth, he became known as Sauron. And when Morgoth was defeated, Sauron was not completely overthrown. Their armies were defeated, but Sauron remained at large. And at first, Sauron hid himself away. And Tolkien says that Sauron regretted his actions to some extent. But it's left purposefully ambiguous whether Sauron regretted his actions in the sense that he was sad that he had participated in Morgoth's evil, or if Sauron was more like the kid who gets caught trying to take a cookie out of the cookie jar, like, I'm sorry I got caught. I regret things didn't go my way, that my side didn't win. But Sauron hides away. But he's not going to stay hidden. He's the Lord of the Rings. He's the villain of our story. So what brings him back? What brings him back into the story? Well, while he's hiding away, Sauron starts looking around. He starts seeing the chaos and the ruin in the world. He starts seeing all the problems, the wars, the fighting, the famine, all these things that are wrong with the world. And he starts thinking, if only I had the power to, fix this. If I had my way, if I had my plans fulfilled, I could change this. I could remove all this chaos and make things orderly. I could make things nice. I could make things better. And that's how he started coming back. Tolkien writes, but the problem that this frightful evil can and does arise from an apparently good root, the desire to benefit the world and others, speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans, is a recurrent motive. Sauron started off with a decent idea. In chaos, in fighting, make things better. Those sound like good things. But he wanted to do it according to his own plan. He's the benefactor in this situation. He wants to do it according to the benefactor, according to his own plans. Sauron lingers in Middle-earth, very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth. He becomes a reincarnation of evil and a thing lusting for complete power. Sauron starts off with fair motives, but he doesn't stay that way. He starts thinking about how he needs power to organize things the way that he wants them. And once he gets some power, he wants more power. And it's never enough. He keeps wanting more power. And he lusts after complete power. But he keeps going and keeps going. And eventually it's no longer about what's best for the world. It's no longer about what's actually beneficial to others. And it's all about him having the power to do things his way, according to his own plan. And he's no longer thinking about God's plan. He's no longer thinking, he never really was thinking about God's plan, But he's not giving that any thought. He's not really thinking about the needs of others because he's only focused on doing things his way, on how he wants things, on how he thinks the world should look. And that leads him to becoming a reincarnation of evil. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf goes to the White Wizard Saruman, expecting Saruman to help. But Saruman reveals, no, I've actually decided to join with Mordor. And Saruman tries to convince Gandalf, hey, you should join us too. You should come with us. You should be on our side in the coming war. You should help us conquer Middle-earth. And in trying to convince him, Saruman says, we may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow. And the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring, maybe, evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order, all the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There would not be, any real change in our designs, only in our means. Saruman started off as a foe to the Dark Lord. But the more and more time that he spent in opposition to Sauron, the more and more Saruman, the Great, the White Wizard, became like the Dark Lord. Saruman wants knowledge, order, and those things sound good. They sound right. But he wanted them according to his own plans. And he stopped caring about how those things were achieved. He wanted them so badly, he didn't care what happened. Oh, sure, he said that he and Gandalf could bide their time, that they could think, oh, we hate this evil that's being done. But the ends justify the means. If Sauron wins and we help him, we can get in his inner circle. And then we can convince him that the things that we want are good. That he should enact the policies that we want. That he should order things the way that we think he should. We can convince him that our way is good. Saruman cared about the purpose, but he didn't care how it was achieved. Because really, he didn't care about others. He just cared about his own power. He cared about enacting his own plan. And he was willing to do whatever he needed to do to get the power to enact his own plan. Evil can begin with fair motives because we are not fair. We are tainted by sin. Our designs could start off seeming good, but they can be twisted. So earlier I talked about the two categories of magic. And just imagine in your heads, if you will, on the left side we have purely good magic. Magic that is just used for creation and self-expression. And on the right we have purely evil magic. Magic that is just used for power and for domination. And you draw a line between the two. You draw a spectrum. And somewhere along that spectrum there's a little gray zone. And in that gray zone walks, conveniently enough, Gandalf the Grey, as we know him at the start of our story. Gandalf is on the side of good. He does not use his power to dominate. But if there's a line dividing good magic from bad magic, Gandalf may be on the correct side, but he is walking right alongside that line. Think about it. He uses his power in battle. He uses it for fighting. But he stops from crossing over that line, from going into the realm of domination. Because he's not fighting to dominate. He's fighting to protect. He's fighting to defend the lives and the freedoms of others. He's fighting to protect the rights of people to use magic in the responsible way. But it would be so easy for him to step over the line, to start using his magic for domination, to start seeking his own will. And Gandalf knows this. Right now he's using his magic for his God-given purpose. But it would be so easy for his fair motives to be twisted. Whenever Frodo first learns what the ring is, he offers it up to Gandalf. And Gandalf replies, "No!" cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. "With that power, I should have power too great and terrible. And over me, the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity. Pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me." Gandalf refuses the ring. Gandalf is a good person. He doesn't want to dominate. He doesn't want to control others. He wants to protect them. He wants to keep them safe. But that's how the ring would get him. Gandalf knows that war is coming. That there are bad things that are going to happen, and he's going to want the power to stop these bad things. That he's going to want more power to help people, to protect them. And the ring's going to offer him that power. It's going to so enticingly tell him that if you just claim me, if you just take my power, you can protect others, you can help others, you can do great good. And Gandalf knows that he's not going to be able to resist. But that's how it'll start. The ring will offer him power. And if he takes it, the ring will twist him. It will cause him to step over that line and to start dominating, to start focusing on his own will, his own plans, rather than the plans of God, rather than the will of God, rather than actually protecting others. He's going to start wanting to do things his way. You see, Sauron, Saruman, and Gandalf all start off doing what they think is best for Middle-earth. They do what they think is right. But two of them decide that what's right is what I think is right. What I see is right. My plans are what's right. Only Gandalf is wise enough to say, no, it's not about my plans. There's a higher power, and the plans of that higher power are what matter, not me. I don't need to dominate. I don't need my plans to be what's controlling the fate of the world. I just need to do my part. Gandalf is the one who shows wisdom. And here's the thing. That is a very good attitude to have. And it's one of the reasons why Gandalf is so wise, is because he is able to reject power, even though he knows it could be useful. The reason the hobbits, or at least one of the reasons the hobbits make such good ring bearers, is because the idea of power is a foreign concept to them. Gandalf or Aragorn, these are powerful guys. Like, one's a wizard, one's an established warrior. They're good at what they do, and they're very kind people. They want to help and protect people. They want to do justice. But they both know how useful power can be. The ring can tempt them by offering them power. Power to do good, yes. But power nonetheless. And if they take that power, the ring will twist them. It will twist their good intentions until they become like the Dark Lord himself. A thing that doesn't care about those around them, that doesn't protect others, that doesn't try to follow God's will, but instead just seeks its own will. And a dark version of that. The hobbits, they're the weakest meekest creatures of Middle-earth. They don't understand power. They survive by staying out of the way of things. There have been a couple of instances where hobbits have fought, but in general, hobbits are creatures that avoid conflict. They try to avoid the notice of others. They survive by not even getting into power struggles. And so if the ring offers it to them, they don't understand what's being offered to them as well. Like, the idea of power is a foreign concept. It's harder to be tempted by it because they don't fully understand it. Gandalf and Aragorn, they're good guys, but they understand how useful power can be. The hobbits, it's so far removed from power that it's harder for them to be tempted. So, I'm going to steal a phrase from Professor Coriolson. That's a name that's going to get brought up again later in this session, but I'm a pretty big fan of his, and I think he has some good analysis of the Lord of the Rings. Actually, I think that's even selling it short. I think he has excellent analysis of it. But one of the phrases I've heard him use is the phrase ring monologue. And what a ring monologue is, according to him, is that it is a section in The Lord of the Rings where a character is being tempted by the One Ring. And the character starts speaking, like talking about what they want to do with the ring, like what the ring is offering to them. And sometimes they are talking, they are speaking out loud. And then sometimes it's an internal monologue, like they're just thinking about it. But most of these things that they're being tempted with are not, at their core, bad things. So one of the temptations of the ring that first pops into mind is Boromir. He is tempted by the ring and tries to take the ring from Frodo, something that he regrets afterwards. But what he is tempted with, the reason that he wants the ring, is because his people are at war. They are about to be conquered. He wants to protect his people. He wants to save his people. That's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. But the ring would twist it. It offers him the power. But if he successfully took it, the ring would twist him. It would cheat him. It would turn him into a darker version of himself. That's the scary thing, is that most of the people who are tempted have good intentions. But the ring twists those good intentions. Very briefly, I'm going to pick on my associate pastor and his wife because they were supposed to be at the physical in-person session, and they weren't. Okay, I'm just joking with them because they might be listening, but they had good reason for missing. But most of the people listening to the session are probably associated with the Bridge Church in Bricktown, where we attend. But I'm going to bring them up just because they have a lot going on in their lives, and just because of the nature of their position, like a lot of people know what's going on in their lives. So our associate pastor, he is currently finishing up schooling, and he is, I believe, also planning a foreign missions trip, plus all the day-to-day activities of just being an associate pastor. His wife is a counselor, and I think that's an insanely important job, like, so important, but also sounds really emotionally draining. They've got a baby on the way. I think all of those things are great things. I mean, the pursuit of knowledge and furthering one's education, I'm all in favor of. Foreign missions, yes. Doing really important jobs, either at the church or at counseling, yes. And starting a family, amazing. Like, those are great things. And they are things that should be used to bring them closer to God. But if they start thinking about these things in the terms of what they need to do, what they need to accomplish, how they need to have a plan and stick to that plan and enact that plan. And they start thinking about these things so much and start relying on their own power and their own strength and their own designs and start trying to like force things through and force their plan to be enacted. And they stop thinking about God. They stop listening for him. Stop trying to figure out what God's plan is. And instead they're only focusing on their own plans, their own strength. Then these legitimately good things, these amazing things, have become distractions. They've pulled them away from God. And I'm not bringing this up because I think that they are likely to allow this to happen. But it's something that can happen to all of us. Sometimes we can have good intentions, but we start thinking about how we need to be the ones to do it. How we have a plan and we need to see this plan through. Our plans are not God's plans. Sometimes things don't work out because God has something better planned out. And either way, it's not about our strength. It's about God's strength. We're supposed to trust in him. We're not supposed to focus on ourselves. We're not supposed to focus on our own abilities. God will take care of the things that need to be taken care of. So, we've been talking about a domination mindset, about possessiveness, about things being twisted from good intentions to evil. So how do we avoid these things? How do we avoid having a domination mindset? How do we avoid becoming possessive? How do we deal with and prevent our good intentions from being twisted to things that distract us from God? To end this session, I want to talk about one of my favorite characters from The Lord of the Rings, Samwise Gamgee. And so, for some context, this passage comes from The Return of the King. This is after Frodo has been attacked and injured by Shelob, the giant spider. Sam thought Frodo was dead, so he took the ring to keep it from falling into enemy hands. But then Sam learns, no, Frodo is still alive. And Sam decides, oh, I need to go in and rescue Frodo. But right now, Sam still has the ring. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Sauron's fortress. And then all the clouds rolled away, and the white sun shone, and at his command the Vale of Mordor became a garden of flowers and trees and brought forth fruit. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. I have to stop for just a second because I love this detail about Sam. So pretty much all the heroes who were tempted by the ring, Boromir, Galadriel, they all picture the overthrow of Sauron. Like, their taking the ring would mean the overthrow of Sauron. That's not a bad thing, the overthrow of Sauron. Sauron's trying to conquer, he's trying to enslave. But I love that Sam's includes that. Yeah, he's going to overthrow Sauron if he takes the ring. But I love that his goes one step further. What's Sam's job whenever he's not on these like world-saving quests? Whenever he's just back in the Shire and he's just plain old Sam? He's a gardener. I love that his vision, the thing that the ring is tempting him with, includes the details that he's not just going to overthrow Sauron, but he's going to heal the land itself. He's going to take Mordor, this barren wasteland, and he's going to make it beautiful. He's going to bring back plant life. He's going to make it into an enormous garden. And I love that detail that it's just like a little detail that I love about Sam, that he's not just worried about like the big war picture, but he also wants like to heal the land of its hurts. But anyway, going on. In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm. But also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sins. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat to betray him. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, and not the hands of others to command. How do we avoid possessiveness? How do we avoid a domination mindset? We be like Sam. Sam realized he didn't need a garden the size of a kingdom. He had a garden back home, and he was content with that. He didn't need any more. We combat possessiveness with contentment, with gratitude for what God has given us. And like Pippin, we need to be willing to give up, to let go of the things that keep us from God. That's how we combat possessiveness. How do we combat a domination mindset? Well, how did Sam combat the ring? He realized he didn't need to command the hands of others. He didn't want to dominate others. He wanted to love them. It was love for Frodo, his friend, his master, that helped him in that time of need. He had love. He didn't want to dominate, to control, to order around those around him. He wanted to show them kindness, to show them love, to show them caring. And that's how we combat a domination mindset. Love is not just a fuzzy feeling we get. Love involves actions. In the Bible, God says that those who love me are those who obey my commandments. If you love me, you will obey my commandments. Love involves action. And if we love others, it's hard to have a domination mindset. Love can be hard. It can take work. It involves giving up our time, our desires. Sometimes we have a Saturday that we want to spend with ourselves, like recuperating from the week or watching the football game, but then a friend needs help because his car is broken down or he needs help moving. Do we show love, or do we want to have dominion? Do we want our will to be in control? If we truly love others, then we're not dominating them. We're not trying to control them. We're not trying to put our will above them. True love means putting their needs above ours. True love means putting their needs above our desires. And if we love God, then we're obeying His commandments. And if we're obeying His commands, His laws, His words, then we're not trying to have control. Like I read earlier, you can't serve two masters. You can't have God and money. You can't have yourself dominate your own life and still follow God. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to make mistakes. There are going to be times where we're going to try to take control. But ultimately, if we truly love and follow God, we're going to realize that and hand the control back to Him. We're going to say, your will be done, not my will be done, because I love you. And we're always going to make mistakes. We're fallen, we're sinful. Our good intentions can be twisted so easily. We can try to do things for God or for others, but then make them selfish, make them distractions. But if we truly love God and truly love others, and we act that out, then it's going to be very hard for our good intentions to truly be twisted, as long as we keep our focus in the right place. Thy will be done, not my will be done. Contentment and love. That's how we combat these things. That's how we say no to our proverbial everyday rings of power. And so these first two sessions have largely focused on the fall, our fallen world, our fallen nature, bad things, how evil perpetuates, stuff like that. And next session, I'm going to continue talking about the fallen nature of the world a little bit. But we're going to wrap up kind of that discussion and also use next week to kind of bridge this small group to more hopeful subjects. So I hope that somewhere in my mad ramblings I've managed to say something of note, something that God can somehow take and use in your life. I hope that I've managed to convey something of meaning, or again, not that I've managed to convey, but that God has been able to work through me, because it's not about me or my power or what I can accomplish. It's about God. So I hope that you'll consider joining me again next week whenever we talk about, well, show up next week and you can see what we'll talk about exactly. Thank you.